Fans of the Horus Heresy, building resin models, and getting good results with your projects, thank you very much for joining me for another how-to demonstration. Following on from the video I did last, where I showed you how to remove release agent from a resin kit, the Mechanicum Triaros, I thought I'd follow on with the theme of updating my how-to demonstration videos. And for this, I was just thinking about what techniques and things you need to do commonly with resin models. So logically, the next thing to do is to think about what's the best technique for removing resin keys from components, your resin kit parts. And to do that, I'm going to use the same kit again. So here is one of the parts on the Triaros. If you're wondering what the key is, it's this thing. You could also call it a casting gate. And this is this big chunky lump thing here. And these things can also be called like casting gates. And this is basically where the resin goes in and the air goes out when it's being cast. Now, they're kind of like sprues on plastic models, but they're a bit trickier to remove in some respects because of the nature of resin and also because of the size. I mean, just look how chunky this one is. So I thought what would be useful is to have a quick demonstration video of the tools and techniques I use to remove the casting key. And I'm going to do this with two parts. As well as this larger one, I'm also going to look at a smaller one because resin kits typically have a mixture of part sizes and well, you can use different techniques to do it. So that is what this demonstration is going to be about. And as well as the techniques, I can also show you the tools I use for this. And talking of the tools, let's go over that now. For the casting gate, we're going to use this. And this is a razor saw. And it's basically like a thin modeling saw. And you can see it's got a finely serrated edge. And it's quite thin and narrow. You can buy these from lots of hobbyist stores, lots of different brands make them. This is useful for these large keys. For the smaller key, we don't need to use a saw. We can use just a pair of snippers. And this is a particular pair I've got. This was by Mr. Tools. Is it Mr. Tools or Mr. Hobby, the brand? It's basically just a pair of snippers, whichever you've got. And those are the main two tools we're going to use. So we're going to use the snippers on the smaller part and the razor saw on the large gates. As well as that, there's a few other tools we'll need here. We've got a sharp scalpel, fairly new blade, so I shall have to be careful here because that is extremely sharp. And then if we need to do some larger sanding, we've also got this, which is a 1500 grit coarse flexi-file flexi pad. And this is like a sanding stick. To go with this, I've also got a glass of tap water, and that is, with these you can wet them, so a bit like wet and dry sandpaper. And that allows you to sand resin components without creating lots of dust particulates in the air, which you want to avoid that when you're working indoors with resin. So yeah, doing wet sanding is a great way to do that. And then finally, as we always do, we've got our good old friend, Dusty Brush. Right, let's start simple and work our way up. So we'll put that one just there. And we'll do this. It really is dead easy, this. We're going to take the clippers and we're going to clip it off the sprue. Once it's clipped off the sprue, we'll then use a scalpel just to trim up and clean around. Now, when you do this, it's not a bad idea to cut not quite all the way up. So can you see how I've left about a millimetre gap? And that's because the key runs right against the detail, as you can see there. So if we just distance our cutting that little bit, if we slip or if it pops off or something, we're not going to damage detail that then needs repairing. And then I'm just going to clip that. Easy peasy. Resin's quite soft to cut with these sort of things, so it doesn't take a lot of effort. And then what we've got is a small nub that's left on here. So I'm going to take the scalpel and carefully cut that away. Now, I know you guys and girls don't like it sometimes when I cut towards myself, so I'm going to start off by just cutting some of it down onto the mat. I'm not a fan of cutting away from myself because you've got less control. I've got a lot of experience of working with a scalpel, so I'm confident cutting towards myself, but you can remove some without doing that. And then I guess I'm just going to very carefully cut this down. Some people might just sand this away, but I'm quite happy to do it with a knife. And in just those very few easy steps, the gate and the key are completely removed. Yeah, I think that's fairly flat. Maybe just scrape, touch more resin away. Yeah, happy with that. Done. So doing the smaller parts is very straightforward. The clippers to cut the stem off, or the casting gate, remembering just to leave that little gap, and then the scalpel just to finish it up. Okay, let's now move on to the larger piece of this track unit. Now here we've got more going on. We've got a smaller gate and then these two larger gates. You can kind of mix and match your tools here, and I'm going to use the clippers to cut this one, the small gate, and then the razor saw to cut the larger ones. So let's start off with the small gate, and I'm going to kind of come in from this direction. Again, I'm not going to cut too close here, so there's no need to. And there you go, that's cut. And then I can also just go and snip that. And there you go, that's gone. That's just one less thing to worry about when it comes to removing this. So now we're going to move on to the razor saw. And I'm going to use a razor saw to cut the key away. I'm going to use the same principle as when I snipped off the small component, the Volkite Sentinel, and I'm going to leave a bit of a gap between the track details and the gate, because the two are sat right next to each other. So it's a bit harder to show you this, but I've lined it up and I've left about 1 millimeter. There you go, you can see. I'm just then going to carefully start sawing. I'm going to do them one at once. And I've gone straight through there. As you could see, I nearly said as you saw, and that would have been very punny. As you can see, the razor saw cuts through resin very easily. So this is a great tool. You can save yourself loads of work. I wouldn't try to do resin kits without one of these. Now we're going to do the same thing, but on this upper post. And there you have it. I went through and then it's just dropped off straight away. Because we've already cut this smaller post, it fell away, so there's no chance of affecting any of the detail there. So taking dusty brush, we'll just clean off some of those turnings. And now we can just see how that looks. So I'm going to use a knife. I'm going to cut the remains of the gate away. And by doing so, I'm just going to do it like bit by bit. I'm not going to try cut it all the way at once. I'm going to kind of like take it down in slices. And over the years I've been modeling, I just find this is an effective technique for this sort of work. If you're wondering about cutting towards yourself, well, I kind of push away with my own hand. So although it looks like I'm cutting towards myself, I'm actually pushing away at the same time. It's a bit like with, what would it be like with acting? If you are acting out a fight scene in a drama, typically actors don't go for each other. They actually push against each other as a means of not hurting each other. And I'm kind of using that sort of thinking here with my cutting technique. So already we've cut a lot of that down. Got to be careful on this little bit here, because this bit of a track linkage detail, we don't want to damage that. Getting a little bit of dusty brush. That's looking pretty decent now. take the sanding stick, dip it in some water, make it wet, and then I'm just going to do a little bit of sanding there to level that off. You can see how the dust is sort of pasting up as opposed to like lots of little particles going into the air. Just a little bit of sanding and that's pretty nicely leveled off. We'll come back to that. I think there's a tool I need to go get to deal with that. Let's do this one here now. So we'll revert back to the scalpel and I'm just going to, in the same way I did with the other side, I'm just going to shave this down using the blade. Again, be very careful. There's probably other ways you could approach this. I'm just showing you the technique that works for me. And indeed, the sorts of tools. I've used scalpel type knives for many, many years. I mean, going all the way back to my childhood. So I feel very comfortable and familiar with it. You know, you might have a different type of hobby knife that you like to use. Anyway, I'll shut up and I'll just cut for a bit. That was pretty decent. There's a bit more to do yet, but that's kind of like finer cleanup work. A little bit outside of the context of what I'm really wanting to show you here, which is the basic key removal. Just going to finish up this little bit here. Okay, right, this peg, I'm going to go get some hobby chisels to deal with that. So I'll be back in a moment. Okay, so we're back. I've got my 3 hobby chisels. Now these are called micro chisels. This is what they look like. And it's just got a very small shaped head and they're quite sharp and they're absolutely ideal for working on resin. The sizes of these, this is a 2mm square one. This is a 1mm square one. This is a 2mm round one. I find with these 3, for my work on resin so far, they've served me very well. And we're going to use them to clean up this. And the reason for this is quite a difficult space to get into with a knife. However, with the chisel, we've got a tool that's actually rather useful for getting into these little awkward spaces like this. And that's why I'm going to use it. Incidentally, these are made by Trumpeter. I think they cost £5 or £6 each. And I get them from e-models. They're really, really worth investing if you are interested in getting into, doing resin modeling. They really are great tools. So I think what we'll do first is we'll take our clippers and we're just going to cut this post down a little bit more. Again, I'm not going all the way down, sticking with my general rule of not clipping right next to the detail. I'm now going to take the chisel, I'm just going to start breaking this peg down. You need a fair amount of strength for these sometimes. Just a little bit of perseverance, and then you can see how, as I've sort of cut, like chopped into in effect, or cut into the top of that peg, how it then starts to break up after a number of different incisions into it. One thing you could do if you were working with these, if you had got some like latex or latex-free gloves, if you're allergic, you could increase the amount of grip that you have on the micro chisel through that. So now the peg has been cut right down, and I can start working to level it off. And to do that, I'm going to use a chisel, and this time I'm just scraping backwards and pulling the material level with the profile of the track around it. And you saw just how easy and quick that was then. As I say, these things are absolutely magic. That's pretty good. I mean, there's more finishing I can do on that, and I will do later. But for purposes of just the basic removal of the peg or the key with there, I mean, just while we're on it, you can see we've got some little mold seams here. And let me just show you how you can remove those with the micro chisel. Such a useful tool. This is a sort of work that isn't going to create clouds of dust either. So it's quite suitable for doing indoors, and you don't need to wear a respirator if you're wanting to protect yourself from resin dust. If you're using power tools, then you should do so. Personally, I don't like using power tools on resin indoors. I just think, aside from obviously the need to wear a respirator, you're just going to get resin dust all over your house because it's so fine, and once it gets airborne, it'll take hours to settle and it'll get everywhere. So I either don't use power tools or I do that sort of work outside. But there we go, and I think, well, I hope you'll agree that's cleaned up very nicely. And there you have it, a demonstration of how to remove keys, both large and small, from resin models and prepare them for assembly, using this relatively simple collection of tools: a razor saw, a scalpel, a sanding stick, micro chisels, and a pair of hobby snippers. I hope you found that a useful and insightful demonstration. As always, I'd like to hear your thoughts and observations in the reply section. How do you go about doing this? Do you have any tips to share with other viewers on how to do this? As always, I'll be very interested to hear. But other than that, I'd just like to say thank you very much for watching. I'll speak to you next time, and goodbye.